So hello and welcome everyone. I'm just going to hand you over to Grant to open us up today.
All right. Welcome everyone to PulpCon 2021. This is our second virtual PulpCon. We hope to spend some time this week going over a lot of topics and getting a lot of feedback from people on things of where we've been in the last year, what we're working on now, what you'd like to see us working on in the next year. I want to thank everybody for being here. This is a really, really good turnout. And my job here is to just kind of open the presentation for you all so that Mel has a chance to test all of our new tech on something that doesn't matter very much. So welcome to PulpCon. What we have on tap today, this is just an overview of the agenda, the opening ceremony, that's where you are now. If you don't want to be here, you're in the wrong place. Matthias will be going over the improvements that he's made to our tasking system this year. Fabricio is going to talk about Pulp on Kubernetes and OpenShift. Mike's going to be, actually, we're switching this out, right? Mike is not going to be doing the installer. I think Douglas Wibbett is going to be giving us a talk instead in that time slot. And then Robin's going to close us up at the end of the morning or end of the afternoon for those of you in the EU with the state of the community, looking back on where we've been over the course of the last year. And the primary purpose, from my point of view, for this section is really just to kind of get everybody introduced and talk a little bit about what we want to get from Pulp. So what I'd like to do at this point is spend a little time just kind of going around the table with everybody answering a few questions. And what we've been doing on the team for situations like this, if you look at the bottom of Google Meet, there's a little hand that you can push. And if you push it, it raises your hand. You can see that I've done it and it kind of waves at you. If everybody does that, then I will go and answer these questions, and then I will pick someone whose hand is raised, and they can go and answer the questions. And as you go, your hand will go down, and we'll know who's had a chance to answer them and who has not. This is just a thing that we've been experimenting with on the team. All right. So the questions that I'd like to ask everyone is, who are you? What was your first contact with Pulp as a project? The casual icebreaker is, where were you when Pulp was born? And this is the first commit in the 1.0 branch of Pulp on GitHub. And then what would you like to learn from PulpCon? What takeaways would you like to have over the course of this week? So who am I? I'm Grant Gainey. I am a principal software engineer at Red Hat. I have been here for what feels like either a year or a century, depending on what kind of day I'm having. But I hit 15 years this year. My first contact with Pulp is I was actually working in engineering on system management on satellite when Pulp was first proposed by a subset of the satellite team. So my first contact with Pulp was in 2007 ish, when it was first being created. So where was I when Pulp was born? I was on the third floor of 1801 Varsity Drive in Raleigh, North Carolina, in a cube going, why did we pick that name? And not getting a particularly good answer. That's where I was with my first contact with Pulp. And then what would I like to learn from PulpCon in 2021? What I'm most interested in getting out of this week is hearing what things people would like to see Pulp do. What are people's priorities in terms of actually using Pulp in important mission critical environments? That's what I'm most interested in getting from this week for me. So that's my answer to those questions. And I don't see anyone else's hand up. There we go. We'll pick Tanya. I think I saw her hand go up first. And then after you've answered your questions, then you can pick the next person whose hand is up. It's all yours, Tanya.
Okay. Yeah, hey, so I'm Tanya, and I work on the Pulp team. So my very first contact with Pulp was in a preparation for an interview to join Pulp team. I went to read about it because I saw this position open. So that was my very first contact. What was the next question, Grant? You removed it.
Oh yeah, I stopped sharing so that we could see you. Okay, hang on.
Right, where I was, I remember in 2007.
Where were you?
Okay. Yeah. So I
have
was
an idea.
still at university, about to finish, I think, and I worked as a software engineer at some ISP provider in Russia.
Very cool. Give me a moment here, folks. I'm going to try and figure out a way to get the questions up in a way that lets us still see people. One moment.
And what do you want to get out of this week, Tanya?
My main goal is to hear from the community, like the pain points, and to see if we get our priorities right with what we are working on. And the next person I pick would be David.
It's still too
Hey,
big.
David.
Hey, so I'm David. I'm a former Pulp engineer. I just left, but I still work with packaging, so I'm interested in Pulp. My first contact with Pulp was when I started at Red Hat. I was a Gatell engineer, and of course we worked with Pulp, so that's how I learned about Pulp. In 2007, I was finishing my master's degree in Florida and moving up to North Carolina because I did not like Florida. It was too hot. And then what was the last? For the PulpCon, I'm interested in installing Pulp. I saw there was a talk on Kubernetes and open containers, so I'm interested in that. What about Melanie?
Hello. So let me. So yeah, first of all, I am Melanie Kaur. I help out with the Pulp community, also with the Foreman community on a day-to-day basis, wherever I can. So what was my first? Let me see. So what was my first contact with Pulp? So I used to write documentation for Red Hat Satellites, so I think my first contact with Pulp was via the Catello plugin and the ways that it was manifesting and needed explanation for satellites customers. So I think that's where I first came across Pulp. And where was I in 2007? So I graduated from university, I think, in September 2007. So in October 2007, I was living at the top of a very, very big hill called Patrick's Hill, and I worked for the Everything Store, that big, giant online company that seems to be getting bigger and bigger as the years go by. How about Daniel? Oh yeah, sorry, there's one last question, isn't there? So what would I like to learn from PulpCon 2021? For me, I am particularly interested in the community pain points and how that I can, in my capacity, make life easier for people in the community. So if there's anything that anyone feels strongly about or would like to talk about at any other point with me, I would be very, very interested to hear. And I've been around for about 18 months now, so I think maybe I might even have a chance of spotting some of these things myself. So Daniel, over to you.
All right, thank you. So I'm Daniel Alley. I'm a senior software engineer with Pulp. My first contact with Pulp was when I had my internship the summer of 2016. My internship is here at Red Hat with the Pulp team, and I joined afterwards. Where was I when Pulp was born? In 2007, I would have been in 7th grade. And what would I like to see? I think along with, I think I would also like to see what people's pain points are in using Pulp and installing Pulp. And yeah. All right, Jared. Oh, wait, Jared's hand's not raised. Sorry.
That's all right.
Ina.
Yeah.
Hey guys, my name is Ina, and I work on Pulp team. My first contact with Pulp was when, a long time ago, I used to be QE, and I was testing Rui Amazon images in Amazon Web Services. And at that time, Rui had Pulp version 0.292. That's horrible that I still remember that, but it was quite some time ago. So it was my first contact with Pulp. When Pulp was born, at that time I was in my home country. I was studying in high school, and I was hating informatics at that time so much. Since then, a lot of things changed for the best. And what do I like to learn from PulpCon? I would like to hear what we can improve from the community, as well as also positive feedback. Because I think for the past couple of years, we've been focusing on users quite a lot. And it would be great to hear like what we have improved, and as well as what things we still have left to. I also look forward to some design and planning conversations with the team members and with the community, because we don't have that much of the opportunity to get together and have such a broader discussion and a lot of inputs as we can have during the PulpCon. I think that's it from the questions. How about Jared?
Hello, I'm Jared. I'm an associate software engineer on the Pulp team. Let's see, my first contact with Pulp was a little over a year ago for the start of my internship during the 2020 summer. Let's see, in 2007, when Pulp was created, I would have been in second grade. So a little bit younger than Daniel. And I probably wouldn't even like touch my first computer yet. Kind of crazy to think about that. Let's see. And then I think the final question is, what do I want to get out of PulpCon? I want to see what people are using the Pulp CLI for, and if there's any pain points and features missing, having worked on it for the past year or so. Dennis.
My name is Dennis Cleven. I'm a principal software engineer here at Red Hat. I first learned about Pulp when I joined Red Hat to work on Image Factory, and I was the only person in the tower that worked on Image Factory. So I interacted with people that worked on Satellite, and the Pulp guys sat near me, and I always heard about Pulp during lunch. And I was at NC State University whenever Pulp was born. I was working at the electrical and computer engineering department on their, I was an assistant webmaster. And I think I was transitioning into my internship at IBM at that time also. And for this PulpCon, I'm really interested in hearing from the community. I really enjoyed that aspect of PulpCon last year. But I'm also looking forward to seeing talks from Fabrizio about the operator work and running Pulp on OpenShift and Kubernetes. I'm also looking forward to discussions about the multi-tenancy and discussions about, I think it's telemetry. There's a talk from Carl Treloff about gathering information from OpenShift, I think. And yeah, just discussions about some design work on Pulp. That's what I'm looking forward to. And how about Lubash?
Hi, my name is Luboš Miachky. and I'm here an associate software engineer in the Pulp team. And my first contact with Pulp was similar as Tanya had. I was first interviewed for that position to work in the Pulp team. It was an internship position almost or more than 2 years ago. And where was I when Pulp was born? It was probably 14 years ago, and I was young and pretty, and currently I'm only pretty. And what would I like to learn from PulpCon? Maybe to understand some interesting things that we are doing across the team and what are the community needs. And maybe Matthias can go next.
Okay, my name is Matthias Delvig. I work as a software engineer at the Pulp team for 1.5 years now. My first contact with Pulp was when I realized that we had at my former company 2 versions of the same product, one based on Catello and the other one based on Spacewalk. And the reason was Pulp didn't handle, or Catello didn't handle Debian packages. And so, yeah, that's the point when I started to look into Pulp, and yeah, we added Debian packages there. Where was I when Pulp was born? I think that's about the time when I started my PhD. And the not so casual icebreaker, I just can't read more than what would, but I think it was you get out of the conference here. I really like to hear user stories and stories about integration of Pulp and other projects. So next on the list is Pavel. Let's hear from you.
Okay. Hello, I'm Pavel Picka and work for Pulp. So let's go for the questions. And first is when Pulp was born. So I think I just finished my high school and still was dreaming about I will be the C developer. Then I found out that I don't want to be later, but doesn't matter. And what was my first contact with Pulp? It was already in Red Hat, and it was when I was looking for a USB cable to connect my Arduino. So I met the Rui developer, and we started talking about it, and there was the position opened. So I tried, and I enjoyed it until today. Okay, so I see, for example, Brian.
Thanks. My name is Brian Batters, and I've been, let's see, my first contact with Pulp. So I actually had not heard of Pulp before I applied for the job to work on Pulp. I knew that I wanted to work at Red Hat. That much was clear, and a lot of people I had seen go to the satellite group. Some friends of mine had already kind of started working there. So there was this opening on the Pulp team, and I applied for it. And I was a manager at my job just before that for like maybe a year. And when I applied, Jeff Ortel, this guy who also was a former Pulp team member, asked me twice during the interview if I understood that this was a programming job, which I thought was hilarious. And so I got back into programming, and that's when I learned about Pulp, and I've been with the team ever since. Where was I when Pulp was born? I was also working at NC State and also did interning at IBM, and I was just starting my PhD. And what would I like to learn from PulpCon? It's nice just to spend some time together and to get to know people a little bit better. So actually, that's one of the things that I'm really looking forward to. I do definitely want to hear some user stories and some perspectives from kind of outside of the team that we work so closely with, but it's really nice to see everyone's faces. And that's what I'm hoping to get out of all our time together. So next, I believe I see Brian Carney's hand raised.
My name is Brian Carney. I'm an engineering manager at Red Hat. I'm beginning to like a lot of you less and less, especially those of you who said I was in 2nd grade or 7th grade or I hadn't yet been born. Yeah, I don't like you guys as much as I did about an hour ago, so just gonna let you guys know that. Where was I when Pulp was born? I was probably in Westford, Massachusetts, with a group of people at Red Hat saying, hey, we got to decompose satellite into a bunch of little things. Hey, Mike McCune and Maureen Duffy, you guys go figure out the content piece. So I don't think I was in the room when Pulp was there, but I was one of the idiots that sent people into the room in order to come up with it way back in the day. I'm not going to listen to Grant talk smack about the name because he was on a team that created Akbar, which is the worst project name ever in the history. Never let engineers name projects. If you want to hear about that, it's called Akbar. Anyways, what do I want to get out of this? As I see a lot of things going on with Pulp at the status report level. And I would like to see what's going on a little bit below the status report level. So anyways, that's what I want to get out of this week. I'll take the next one in the queue. Robin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Robin Chan. I am also an engineering manager here at Red Hat, and I manage the Pulp team. So most of the folks here that work for Red Hat, except for Brian, work for me, most of them anyway. Few exceptions. And let's see, I first learned about Pulp when I was looking at local job descriptions, trying to figure out which companies had openings hiring for testers because my husband was actually looking for a job. So I thought I would use my manager skills to try to backwards engineer and figure out who had local teams because my husband really wanted to work with the team locally, not remotely. And I happened to read the job description and I went, oh, wow, this looks like a good job for me. So that was a nice perk. And my not so casual, so the other one was the icebreaker was where was I? So back in 2007, I was a full stack engineer working on a telecom mobile number portability database. So when you take your number from one carrier to another, there was a database that did a lookup. So fun fact is if you look for your IMEI on your phone, that was one of the fields in the database. That was a very large database. Fun job back then. And let's see, although I am very glad not to be using Perl anymore, that was not fun. Let's see, what am I looking to learn? I really love how this team and the folks, not just on the team, but in the community at PulpCon get together and talk about some fun issues. And it's really cool to see what comes out of that innovation and that kind of time set aside just to kind of think about things, talk about problems, the stuff that kind of happens, what we would say in the hallways, sometimes at conferences, but we'll try to replicate that here. That's what I'm looking to see what comes out of this conversation. So, all right, I see Fabrizio has his hand up.
So hi everyone, my name is Fabrizio. I'm a software engineer on Pulp, and I'm currently based in Brazil, but I'm about to move to Portugal. And about my first contact, it was for my interview about 2 years ago. And I remember Googling about that, and I found Dennis juggling in some conference. And now I realized that was a hint on what my job gonna be, like juggling among plugins. So, and where was I? I just joined university by that time on mathematics, and I was trying to run away from programming, and now here I am. And what I would like to learn from PulpCon, I want to learn the testimonial of the survivors and the first impressions. I know, like, for us on the Pulp team, some like team member take us by hand and help us with the installation and all the environment, but users out there don't have all this help, and I want to get to learn about this experience and try to improve it. And let me see, I see Justin. Go on, Justin.
Thanks, Fabricio. I'm Justin Sherrill. For anyone who doesn't know me, I work on Catello. So we integrate with Pulp and provide additional workflows on top of Pulp that are integrated with provisioning and other things. And what I want to get out of this week is I want to kind of hear about the newer features that you're interested in adding and better understand those and how they might affect Catello. And also get some of the deeper knowledge about some of the topics like the tasking system and Dynaconf and that sort of thing. And where was I when Pulp was started? I was actually working on Spacewalk, that project that Matthias was talking about. Java, mostly Java, a little bit of Perl, a little bit of Python, both of which were not very good examples, I think, of Perl or Python. Actually, no, sorry, the Perl was a very good example of Perl. Take that however you will. And that's it.
All right. I don't see any other hands raised. Have we touched everyone who was willing to present this morning? Anybody else want to take a stab at those questions? Give it a moment here. All right, those are really interesting answers. I have learned things about my fellow teammates that I did not know, which is very cool. And just for the record, Brian, I wasn't the one that came up with Akbar. I was on RHN already by then, so not my fault. Not my fault. That's what we have for the opening ceremony today. We're a little early, a little before time, but I think that is okay. Melanie, I think we are good to close this up, and we will start up again at 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, which will be 3 p.m. Central European Time, I believe, if I have my time zones correct, with the next presentation, which was Matthias will be talking to us about the new tasking system. Does that sound right to everybody? See lots of heads nodding and thumbs up. All right, thank you all very much, and we will see you over the course of the rest of the week. Welcome to PulpCon.
Thank you, Grant. Matthias, do you want to take some time and test your audio, test your slides? I'll like stuff.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm hitting the button. Oh wow, ask for consent this time, didn't the last. So we're beginning our recording now. Okay, doke, Matthias.
Hello, everybody. This is the first substantial talk after the introduction of PulpCon 2021. Today is 8th of November. My name is Matthias Delvig. I'm working as a software engineer at Red Hat. And I'm going to give a small overview over the tasking system that has been developed in the past year. And I think there's something we learned, and there were some challenges we overcame, and probably some more to come. I'm trying to structure this as a small presentation, and hopefully we will have time for a little bit of discussion afterwards. So, next slide, please. Yes, we needed a new tasking system because there were problems, so let's talk about the problems. Let's talk about solutions taken, and then look at what we gained in a conclusion. Next slide, please. Again. Pulp always had a tasking system, and of course Pulp 3 always had a tasking system, and this tasking system was kind of inherited from Pulp 2. It was using the same architecture. It used the same backbone worker threads, which were Celery based at that time. But it introduced a new concept, and that was that the tasks were able to lock on multiple resources at the same time. And well, it all started with the hanging tasks, and hanging tasks is something that I heard a lot in the context of Pulp 2. And at that point, Pulp 3 was already in the making, and I had a look. After trying to understand what was going wrong with Pulp 2, I had a look into Pulp 3, and I realized, oh, this looks roughly the same. So I had a lot of discussions with, I think, Brian at that point. And I was told, oh, it's okay. Pulp 3 is going to switch to RQ, and this will solve the problems. And it looked like, actually, I must say, it looked like the problems were gone, but at some point, the hanging tasks came back. And I think this was due to a small bug in RQ, which was admittedly fixed fast. But the deeper analysis was that the architecture had tasks represented in two databases at the same time. There was the Pulp database, being it Mongo or Postgres, doesn't really matter here. And the other database was whatever the task queue used to track its tasks. And in Redis queue, and this was obviously a Redis database. I think this is called the out-of-box pattern. And it's really, in my opinion, the heart of the problem here. Next slide, please. So at that point, the legacy tasking system turned into a simple task queue that had a complicated task distribution mechanism in form of the so-called resource manager. And on top of that, there were a multitude of consistency and cleanup hacks. So it's really, yeah, it got patched and patched and patched, and the problems didn't go away. It still had it still created a lot of churn. Next slide, please. Apart from the consistency problems that arose from the fact that the tasks were represented in two databases at the same time, we also identified that the resource manager is a rather slow thing, and at some point we saw that it was able to dispatch about 2 tasks a second, which means if you have fast running tasks and you can add more workers, you just don't get any more speed up, because 2 tasks per second was the limit at the bottleneck, being the resource manager. So at that point, we decided that we want to rebuild the whole thing in a completely different way. Next slide, please. Why did it take so long? Well, first of all, the problems were rather hard to reproduce on a development system, which is usually a small installation tuned for fast developing, and the problems really came on the larger installations on scale. So at some point, we instantiated a tasking system task force. And we tried to manage all the problems. But at that point, we still needed to support the old legacy tasking system, and we kind of still do. And this takes resources, obviously. Also, introducing such a big change in a core component of your project needs a lot of planning and caretaking. So next slide, please. So at that point, we decided to rewrite the thing. And actually, even before we decided this, we had a discussion on last year's PulpCon, which is like 13 months ago now. And we talked about a solution, or let's say one of the problems here is that everything is around resource locking. And so the idea could be, if you don't need to lock on resources, all the problems go away. And so we had a discussion about so-called lockless pulp. And the idea is, if everything is immutable, then there's no need for locks, because everyone can use everything and no one will change it while you use it. But the problem is, this would have been a very, very big change in all parts of pulp and the core idea of what pulp handles. And so this was too scary. And we kind of wanted to go a less intrusive way at that point. Next slide, please. So for the solution we came up with, let's revisit the resource constraints here. Tasks in pulp act on resources, and usually they should act on resources exclusively, because if one task changes a resource, then another task cannot rely on the state of the resource, and therefore it should wait. And also, we say, for each single resource, the task that claimed the resource and is the oldest one to do so should be the first to act on the resource. So this kind of means the tasks are serialized by every single resource they use, and every other tasks need to wait. And if you look at this from another perspective, then this means once a task is the oldest on all of his resources, this will stay that way until the task is finished and no longer needs the resources, which then gives room for other tasks to be the new oldest on that resources. And that means every single algorithm you run to identify the set of tasks you can work on must come to the same conclusion at the same time. And at that point, we realized, okay, we don't need a resource manager anymore, because everyone can do the same calculation and come to the same result, and then you just grab a task that is ready to be worked on. Next slide, please. So at that point, the distributed pulp worker enters the stage. And the top features here are, there is no top-down distribution of tasks, but the workers use kind of a crowd algorithm to race for the next available task they want to work on. And we started using Postgres advisory logs to serialize the workers on the tasks, so that no two workers can grab the same task at the same time. And this has one big upshot, or two. This makes the Postgres server the only communication point for all workers and other processes that dispatch tasks. And at the same time, the cleanup of logs we get for free, because once the Postgres server realizes that a database connection is dead, it just cleans up for us. So this kind of summarizes the ideas behind the new tasking system. Next slide, please. So one of the highlights of this tasking system is it was tested in production. I'm not quite sure what that means, by a community member, maybe on this call. But I really say this is rather a sign of frustration than a good thing to do. I mean, frustration with the legacy tasking system at that point, which kind of circles back to the why did it take so long slide. But at some point in time, we introduced the tasking system with the Pi version of Pulp. I just realized. So 3.14. And we introduced it to live side by side with the old one because we wanted to be very, very careful to not break existing installations here. Just before releasing 3.14, we decided, okay, this is the upstream project. We need to move fast. We need to get features in running state. So we switched it to be the default, despite the previous plan to introduce it as non-default, at some point switch it on by default and then remove the old system. So we just switched it on. And as far as I remember, we got good feedback from this move. And it came just in time for a new feature that is non-exclusive locks on resources. So now tasks can even opt to share resources for read-only access. And this would have been impossible with the old design. And then as a last step, and we are past that, the legacy tasking system was removed in, I don't know too much, version 3.16 of Pulp, which is still the current one. So next slide, please. I said we learned something on the way, and I think what we learned is it's never too late to redesign a core component of such a software project. Another learn is that architectures matters a lot. Simple with less components is usually better. And what I personally learned is that keeping multiple databases consistent with the same data is almost impossible. And one very nice thing we learned is that including downstream projects early in the discussion leads to better adoption of a feature. So while still planning what we want to do, we already made calls with downstream projects. And I think that helped those downstream projects to adopt the new tasking system with less fear, to say. And at that point, I want to open up the rest of the session for discussion. So next slide, please. Thank you to this point, and one slide back, please.
So when you say consistency across databases, are you talking about Postgres and Redis being consistent?
Yes. Or for that purpose, Mongo and Celery.
Yeah.
And the problem is that tasks were represented in both databases, and whenever something went wrong, and it was never clear what all can go wrong, it ended up having unfinished tasks in one database while the cleanup job in the other database has gone, or something like that.
Yeah.
So Matthias, you mentioned that the performance issues were only really visible on large scale like deployments.
Well, the performance issues I could see on a development box that it's impossible to dispatch more than 2 tasks a second. But yeah, the consistency lockups or the lockups and the consistency problems usually came on bigger installations.
I see. And was that a function of Pulp running across multiple nodes, or the function of Pulp running multiple locks, or both? I mean, running multiple tasks at once.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
It was usually you need to run a lot of tasks and maybe restart a worker, and at some point you end up with a jammed system.
Right. It's right. So I'm trying to think as the person who maintains the development environment, if there's any way I could help catch these errors in the future, you know.
Yes, on the way we identified a lot of problems, and I think we, well, added patches, not to say fixed them, in the old tasking system. So yeah, we hope it's better now than before, but it's still hard to say if you really closed all the holes.
Yeah, gotcha.
Thank you. Douglas?
I was just going to answer Mike's question, at least from a personal perspective. Our pulp instance, we've got multiple pulp instances, but from a pulp perspective, they're completely independent. We got all the way through local testing, where we're just proving the code out without any issues at all. And it wasn't until we hit production where we were generating releases, and a release would create circa 2,000 tasks, and we would see maybe 2 or 3 stuck tasks then, and it was on a single node, no restarts involved. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wow. That's at least 2,000 tasks when you do a release job or your release workflow, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm trying to think. I have to keep this in mind consciously as a real real world use case. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
I mean, it's humbling, but it's also thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Daniel, next.
Yes, so you mentioned at the beginning of the talk that the resource manager was such a bottleneck that the tasking system sometimes could go down as low as only being able to handle 2 tasks per, or dispatch 2 tasks per second. I was wondering if you could talk about like some of the performance numbers of the new tasking system.
Sure. I don't have the numbers from the top of my head, but at least it scales with the number of workers you add, because the crowd algorithm kind of identifies in parallel what tasks to work on. I know that I've made some tests on a single VM with up to 32 workers, and at that point I realized, okay, now the load on the database, hitting the tasks table to find new tasks is so much that it starts to slow down again. But up until 16 workers, there was just nothing to see. And thank you, Brian. You just shared a link to the diagrams I made from the numbers I got. Exactly, and there's a blog post on our website talking exactly about those speedups. Does that answer your question? At least indirectly? Yes. Thank you. Grant?
Yeah, just another data point in terms of old tasking system. One of our downstreams, Rui, similar to what Douglas is talking about, syncs 600 to 1,200 repositories all at once, at least once a day. And they would see the hang that we're talking about here, like Douglas, 2, 3, 4 times in a given sync context. It's another set of issues that we only have when we're performing at that level are some of the deadlock problems that we hadn't solved over the last year, which again, you would only see if you were doing hundreds of simultaneous syncs, and then that makes these small timing windows suddenly happen. So that's the level, Mike, of not level. It gives you an idea of the size of the windows we're talking about. The windows are very small, so you have to have a lot going on to accidentally trip into them. And I'm not sure that's something that we can reliably reproduce in a development environment on a regular basis, but it's certainly something that we're working with some other groups here at Red Hat to be able to do performance, and scaling problem issues where they can hammer a pulp instance with just hundreds and hundreds of simultaneous stuff happening, and we'll learn a lot from that.
Yes,
Well,
that makes sense.
At least at some point, I was able to put a sleep statement in the right place, and just about the right place to reproduce such a hang. But
Once you know they're there,
it was only one of the many types of hangs we get there. So next, Brian, please.
Yeah, Matthias, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this tool that you had made, which I think is really great. The Hermeneutics testing tool, which I put a link in the repo or into the chat here.
There's a small plugin, Pulp plugin, Brian is referring to, and it is living in my personal GitHub account. It's called Pulp Hermeneutics, which is a small plugin with an endpoint that can trigger a lot of tasks, and you can kind of specify, I want 1,000 tasks, I want about a third of them failing, and I want them to use random 2 out of 10 resources and that stuff. And we used a lot. We use this a lot to test the new tasking system for the features of the new tasking system, and we also tried to reproduce the task hanging problems with this tool. And yeah, at some point maybe I'm going to write tests using such a tool so that we can have proper stress test of the tasking system in our CI. I just didn't get to it yet. Anything to add there, Brian?
No, it's a great tool. It was very useful.
Yeah, this one is specific for the tasking system, but I can imagine us to have such a debug plugin for testing in a wider range. But maybe that's for another talk. Grant again?
So I'm just following down the question that Mike asked triggered something for me, which is multiple nodes of pulp. This tasking architecture will work just fine, even if you've got pulp, as long as we're all sharing obviously the same database instance. It'll work in a multi-node environment, a clustered environment, correct?
That's correct, because Postgres is really the only communication point for all tasking related stuff here.
Now, if we do that, we still will hit the problem that you were hitting, which is at that point, the bottleneck becomes too many things are hitting Postgres at the same time. So there's still a consideration to make there. So clustering to take advantage of this would not be just clustering pulp. It would also be thinking about what's the high availability clustering story of Postgres itself in order to make it not the bottleneck. But both of these problems sound like they could be solved or have been solved. It's just a question of setting up your environment in a way that is aimed at higher performance. Does that make sense?
You're talking about clustered Postgres.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a problem we don't solve for you.
Oh, exactly right. Exactly right. But it's not something that would need to be reinvented. There is an answer if somebody says, how do we make this performant? It's not just this tasking system. This tasking system has all the blocks for being performant, because even though the database is going to be an issue, the database itself can be clustered as well to help with the restriction that you ran into. If that makes sense. Cool.
Can I just give a little bit of perspective on that idea, Matthias? So the first kind of like when you talk about clustered software, whether it's tasking system or other areas, the first thing you want to do is make sure that you can scale and have more hardware resources create more throughput. Like that's an architectural. And I do feel that this definitely accomplishes that goal. But as soon as you kind of like nailed that solution and architecture, the game kind of changes, and the game becomes how much throughput can you get for each piece of hardware that you add into the cluster. And this becomes more of like a problem of economics, really. And so our job, while yes, it's true that you can always add more Postgres nodes to a point to get more kind of transactional Postgres throughput, and that's going to do better things for your pulp at scale. We still do have more work to do. I don't know, Matthias, if it's something you feel like talking about or not, but we do have more work to do to make this tasking system cheaper to run. It's already, I would put it in the, cheap to very cheap category. And because you can run on a small Postgres database, say like 16 or 32 workers, that can already likely max out all your other hardware resources easily. So like I would say it's cheap to very cheap to run, but we still do have some improvements to make it maybe ultra cheap. Like if you wanted to run 64 or 128 or larger worker counts, we probably would need to make it a little bit cheaper. And specifically, I think the issue is the transactional load that the algorithm puts on Postgres is expensive. And if we were a little bit trickier about some of the details in that algorithm, we might be able to do better.
And it may be as easy as having a lock that not all workers look for new tasks at the same time.
Yeah, it's going to be like some small, simple things like that we could put in place. But I think we haven't moved on that. And Matthias, I don't think we have any plans to move on that right now because we haven't had that as a goal. Because 32 workers is more than enough likely for most folks, famous last words. And until we need more, we're probably going to spend our time on other things.
Douglas, how many workers do you run?
A little more than that per host. Not by a huge amount, and the hosts aren't clustered, they're completely independent.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming this is not the API workers.
Yeah, exactly. This is the workers that do the syncing and the publishing and all that.
Yeah, I think we run 40 or 42.
42 is the perfect answer.
It's slightly more than the number of cores we've got on the box.
Well, that sounds like in the ballpark where you may see the database to slow down.
I will keep that in mind that you're doing like a couple more workers per than you have per cores.
Yeah, that seems to make perfect sense. Also, Matthias, when you saw that slowdown at 32, what was Postgres running on? Was it the same box as Pulp? Were they competing for CPU, or was Postgres on its own node?
Yes, it was all the same VM.
Okay, so that's like the worst. Go ahead.
I believe around 2 CPUs, around 2 gigs of RAM.
Okay.
So not a big thing.
Yeah,
and maybe,
it's like the worst case.
Maybe scale testing on other hardware would get to other numbers there, or for sure would get out of the numbers.
Yeah, part of the problem or part of the challenge is it's not that when you look at the Postgres usage, and Matthias, this is my understanding, so definitely to help me make sure this is accurate, but it's not that you're going to see your Postgres like under a super large CPU load. What I think you're going to see are that there's many transactions that are waiting for exclusive access to the same table, and so this is a really this is an architectural problem because you can't just put more hardware behind it. It can only process that single thing so fast before it goes to the next and to the next and to the next. So the good news is that it's not like it's overwhelming the CPU of Postgres, but the bad news is you can't just put more stuff behind it. And kind of the interesting part, and I think you made this clear, Matthias, but it can be confusing. The interesting part about the slowdown is that it's actually on the dispatch side. It particularly is slower when you're trying to create tasks, particularly.
Yes, the problem measuring it is I need to create a lot of tasks to see all the workers looking for them. But yes, because the workers are mostly looking for tasks, they have the shared table lock, and the dispatch wants to create a new task, so it needs the exclusive table lock. That's correct. And yes, I should have mentioned that the tasks table in Postgres is the central station where everything is, where all information about tasks is handled.
And that speaks to Brian's. That's one of the architectural issues. Is it's right now that's an unavoidable architectural collision point. That's one of the low-hanging fruit maybe we could look at is if we're looking at performance is how do we ameliorate that particular collision? Not, as you say, not adding hardware, but how do we ameliorate that collision from an architectural point of view, which slowly leads us down the path to lockless. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's roughly like how can we throttle the workers just about enough to get less transactions on the database.
Yeah, and I also want to kind of accurately set the concern level, which my concern levels are pretty low, actually. If you look at this blog post that Matthias put together for this A New Tale blog post, if you look at the top graph in the benefits and performance section, you can see the problem right here in this graph. It's the dispatch time, so this is the time to create tasks, and you'll see that the new tasking system, this green line, rises, and it's on a logarithmic scale. So it's rising exponentially, even though, well, it's a regression line that you see there. But anyways, it definitely rises between 16 and 32 workers. But to be clear, right, it's always between 0.01 and 0.1. So what that means is like, okay, so if you're dispatching lots and lots and lots of tasks, each task taking 1/10 of a second is the limit. And we could further analyze that, but it would, I mean, is it worth it? That's kind of the question I kept coming back to.
But to be clear, this was, Matthias, didn't you say this was 2 CPUs and a couple gigabytes of RAM? Or no?
Sorry, this was all the development VM I ran the tests on. So
yeah.
At least the tasking systems should be comparable because it was the same machine.
Yeah, so in some sense, this, the slowdown at 32 tasks might not even be real if there was 32 CPUs that they didn't have to fight over.
Well, I guess this is what I'm trying to point out is that it's not, more CPU won't make it go faster because it requires an exclusive write access to the table. And so even on a bigger Postgres, I expect to see the similar throughput.
Yeah, I feel like if you have more CPUs, you're bound to put even more stress on the Postgres.
Well, the Postgres is also running on the same box with 2 CPUs. So everything is fighting for CPUs from everything else. So even if it's dependent on, write locks, just the lack of resources could.
Yeah, that's fair. There will be some speed up.
One advantage to running these kinds of tests on that kind of system is a development VM where everything's on one node and it's resource constrained is the worst possible case, which means it will show you problems way earlier. Because this is showing us something that's an issue. It's just you can see it right away. If you have a more production level setup, you might not notice that there was an issue until you have someone who, like Douglas is talking about, well, I want to run I need to do 2,000 at once. And all of a sudden you have a problem. So I'm actually a huge fan of what do we learn from a constrained environment, because the architecture problems we're hitting exist, and we just get to see them earlier and possibly deal with them earlier than if we waited until we had a full performance run from the performance team on a more reasonable setup. Great numbers though. Even with the problems we're talking about here, this is such an improvement.
Yes, agreed. Seeing these charts makes me want to do performance testing on a regular basis. And I know we've discussed this many times before, but it would be nice if we could have graphs like this that we generate on a regular basis with some sort of automation on dedicated hardware.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we should have a dog food server, a dog food pulp server that's somewhat approximating what someone would use in production and approximating production workload.
I could easily give you ideas of what a production workload is going to look like for Pulp.
I would like to see, just in response, Neil, to you and to Douglas's comment, I'd like to see a thread in discourse with exactly that, because I think that would be incredibly useful for those of it. It's really easy when you're developing this stuff to get used to thinking that, well, what happens on my dev box is what happens in the real world, even though we all know that's wrong. I would love to see that kind of information somewhere.
Yeah, so we're starting to work on a plan to implement Pulp at my workplace to replace our litany of homegrown weird stuff. And I can at least give you an idea of like what our setup is like with our litany weird thing, and we can talk about translating that into something useful to simulate with a Pulp workload. Like, I can at least say that the vast majority of the content is like public stuff, and the stuff that is non-public, I can give reasonable approximations and substitutes to get to that kind of setup. So, like, we have a lot of distro mirrors. We have a few internal product specific repos that we have a small set of packages in there, but we have workflows around them that for snapshots and mirrors and maintaining multiple versions and all that kind of stuff, and automation requirements. So I could write up something on the discourse forum, and we can talk about how that implementation would look like, so that we can have something stood up public that kind of does something like it, so that everyone can hit it and see how that looks.
That would be outstanding. I would owe you multiple beers for that if we're ever in the same place.
That sounds awesome. I'll relay the beer.
Yeah, I definitely would value that. I mean, not only in terms of helping to improve the software itself and also maybe protect perhaps your outcomes, but for people to see that there are Pulp installations of this size and to hear kind of firsthand about how those experiences have gone, I think would be very valuable to the community. Because right now, if somebody says, hey, I need a large installation, can it go that far? We don't really have much in the way of kind of firsthand evidentiary based.
Well, you have all those satellite installs that have Pulp, right? Like, those must be huge.
We have a bunch of smaller installs, I would say.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, so they all run on one box. I think, like, how many workers are on these? For example, even just in the upstream with Catello, maybe Justin can tell us how many workers are on these boxes.
Yeah, it's like number of CPUs by default. Obviously, a user can change that. I know with Pulp 2, we saw some issues once you got above a certain number of workers. So we like capped it at like 16 or something like that. Maybe it was 24 or 32. But that's about the size you're going to get as far as number of workers.
That's pretty big then. That's bigger than I thought it was maybe like 8 or 16. So that's actually pretty big, 32. I just wanted to also connect this idea with, I think, Daniel's talk. I don't know when it is on the schedule, but Daniel's going to show how some like monitoring tools with like Grafana, which I think fits hand in glove with this conversation, because in tuning your system to your workload, you really want to watch your hardware metrics. You could easily overwhelm other hardware resources by running too many concurrent tasks.
And I think Douglas is going to be talking to us about his real life experiences as well. The other thing about satellite is satellite tends to be more distributed. You have a central, but there's also a lot of capsules that are running largely independently from the main one. So it's not quite as much of a single hit, even if your satellite installation is supporting 100,000 clients. That's not one node. That's a lot of capsules, and probably multiple satellites behind, multiple distributed clusters.
Plus, at least in terms of Pulp 3, we don't have that background knowledge just yet. Of course, we have a whole lot of Pulp 2 based satellites that we know about, but we've not quite got there yet with Pulp 3.
Soon.
Okay. We are almost at time, so we have 6 minutes left. If there are any more questions to this topic. And if not, I don't think it hurts to finish a little bit early. And thank you very much again for listening and for discussing all of this. And it's really, I've been the main architect of the new system, and it's nice to hear that you have questions about it and that you like it.
Thank you. As the SRE, this has been invaluable.
Thank you, Matthias. So I will just stop the recording now. And we will have a short break, and we will be back then afterwards with a session from our own Fabrizio on Pulp on OCP and K8 Kubernetes. So exciting times ahead.
Yep.
Thanks very much, Matthias. I think that all went well.
Thanks to you and Grant covering for my technical problems.
I'm always happy to push buttons.
I believe I don't believe I was joined early enough for the introductions. Douglas. So I'm the service reliability engineer on Pulp. I'm responsible for maintaining installers/deployment methods, and obviously doing the development too. That's primarily I'm primarily on the Ansible installer, but also on the Kubernetes operator in the single Docker image.
Okay.
I'm curious if you can introduce me to your own use case of Pulp.
Yeah, sure. I've got a talk about it in about an hour.
Okay. Okay, great.
Do you know this is Wibbit, Mike? Are you aware of that?
God, thank you for explaining that now. Yes, I know what you Wibbits.
Okay.
And Mike, he's going to take your slot for this in a little bit. So.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's one of the major pluses of having
Okay, we are up again. We are on the hour, so I will just start the recording now. And it's all over to you then, Fabrizio.
Okay. Hi, my name is Fabrizio. Is it start recording now?
I think it always kicks in just slightly before, so I think you were pretty good.
Yeah, so starting again, my name is Fabrizio. I've been working on Pulp, I think, for 2 years and couple months now. And I've been working on many plugins like Pulp Ansible, RPM, and I'm now majorly on the installer team. And I intend to give some overview and share my learning of the past months about the operator. And I would say this is kind of bold presentation, but like being full honest, it's like a kind of dumb presentation because I'm just learning it and I had the idea of doing a live demo, so let's see how it will go. Yeah, that was the disclaimer. So yeah, be patient with me because I'm learning and I will be doing a live demo and probably things won't go as I expect. So this is like pretty hard to talk about Pulp operator because there is like buzzwords everywhere. So we are talking about operators, Kubernetes, Ansible roles, containers, Pulp, and so on. So like if I had like a competition about like buzzwords talking, I could put everything on a title and win that easy. So this is the thing that scares me the most. Like almost 2 years ago when I didn't know Ansible and operator just combines all the YAMLs from Ansible and all the YAMLs from Kubernetes, and this is like very confusing for people that are starting on it. So I'll try to jump to a quick demo about that. So but first let me show here we have like the repository of Pulp operator, and it has like some kind of template on how the operator works, and it comes from the operator SDK, and if you go to test data, you can see they have some Ansible operator, just very similar to the structure we have. And here's the operator SDK documentation, and you can find more about the Ansible operator here. And as I said before, we mix it like Kubernetes with operator, so we have some specific roles for setting Pulp, and you can find more about Ansible roles on the Ansible documentation. This is like very good resource. But now I'll be starting the demo on OpenShift. So here we have like the main view, the overview view, and you can start going to Operator Hub. And yeah, when it loads, okay, you can just find it here. And you'll get a warning as it is a community project. It's not like a Red Hat certified product. So, okay, we just continue from that. And here you can see a bunch of information about the operator itself, but we are going just to install it. We're choosing the default namespace and waiting for the installation to complete.
What is the installation of an operator? Is it pulling down a container that has the operator?
It does have a custom resource definition. and it gets it from there and builds the operator from it. It is yet another YAML with all the specifications on how to build this specific operator.
Cool. So it is building a container right now. Or is
Yes.
the container pre-built and it's just downloading it?
I don't know the internals of OCP, and I believe a container is just pre-built and it's just getting all the information from Pulp.
But we haven't
I
published
think
container assets.
When the operator is published, is it just that repository is published, or is a container published?
So yeah, there is a pipeline on publishing the operator, and they have something, I think it's the operator lifecycle manager, and it holds our operators in a catalog, and when we publish that, it just gets saved there. Like we have I think 3 versions of operator there. I'll show that on.
Yeah, Fabrizio, I think the important question is this: once you install the operator, is the container called Pulp operator and the container called Pulp? Containers called they run Pulp, or are they up and running? Or are they running on the cluster once it's done installing?
I think I understood the question. I think there is a container for all the catalog entries for all the operators out there. And right now that we got the Pulp installed, if you go to pods, you can see there is a pod running, and there is like an operator, Pulp operator pod. And
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what was the question, but yeah, I think it tries 2 containers, one for the catalog entries and this one that just got pulled from there that is Pulp operator specific.
Okay. And what Mike was asking, I think, is does installing the operator start the Pulp services? And to me, it doesn't look like it does. It only starts the operator service.
No, yeah, you need to install the custom resource, the Pulp. So here, when you go, so can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, you're showing us.
Yeah, my screen just shut down, but so keep going. So when you go to the installed operators, you have this view here, and all the Pulp installation will start when you create a Pulp custom resource.
Right. So when the operator is installed, it pulls down the operator image, the image that is basically named Pulp operator, but it does not pull down the image that is named Pulp.
Yep. And so now we're going to create Pulp.
Because remember, an operator is basically a management container that manages the application containers.
Did we just lose Fabrizio?
I think we did. He's frozen
Yeah.
for me.
Oh no.
Yeah, that's what. So
give him a sec.
Yeah. So I think I do want to continue the discussion about like, the architecture or the design of the operator and the images. So remember with containers, the container is an instance, a runtime, like a running process of an image. It also has like files on disk that are attached, like temporary files, scratch files over the attached container, not the image. So you have a running Pulp operator container from the Pulp operator image when you install it, but it says I'm not going to immediately create, and I'm going to immediately download the Pulp images. I'm not going to immediately start the Pulp containers until you tell me how to create them. I do believe when you install the operator, it understands the template for Pulp, but doesn't handfold in the values for how Pulp should be run. The template says, I understand these settings of Pulp.
Yeah, and that's what that screen was, right?
Yeah.
You fill out those settings.
Yes, the custom resource definition says these are the settings and these are the acceptable values, and the custom resource is like, I want an actual instance of pulp. Here's my settings.
So when Fabrizio was listing the pods, I noticed that the name of the pod was something like pulp operator controller something. So is it for this reason that it's called controller, that it basically controls the cluster pulp deployment on the OCP?
I think so. They recently divided the pulp operator container into 2 different containers. And I think one's called controller, one's called something else.
Oh.
It's just different parts of the overall management process, you know? You could basically treat them as one overall entity because they're 2 containers in like the same pod and they access each other's private data and stuff like that, you know? But it did, ultimately one does control the pulp application though. Or both do to some degree or another. I forgot to read about the architecture. I can also provide a little bit more background. So you're wondering, why are we doing things in Ansible? Well, the operator framework, which is, the framework that you write against to create these management containers called operators. Initially, they only supported Go because Kubernetes is written in Go and the best bindings, the best APIs are written in Go. And then they added support for Ansible, and now Ansible's mature. And only recently they had support for Python, and I don't think Python's mature not yet. It's also just the highest level language you can write it in, is Ansible.
Okay.
Speak with
Can
the
you all
devil.
hear me?
Yep, welcome back.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I think Red Hat Brazil has accepted my resignation too early because I can not log on any of my Red Hat account now.
So Fabrizio, what I'm hearing is you're going to fly to Portugal and then log back in for this call, right?
Yeah, so everything was ejected and I just could get back to it with my personal account. So does it still recording?
We're still recording. Yes. Mike has been doing an outstanding job at covering for you while you were having technical difficulties.
Yeah, I was explaining some of the high level details how operator works and how there's operators can be written in different languages.
May I ask a question at this point? If you have a single pulp operator container running, is it possible to control multiple pulp installations in the same cluster by that? Multiple completely independent installations.
Can you repeat that question?
Let's say you have your cluster and you have one single pulp operator container, pod, whatever, running. Is it possible that this can run multiple independent installation of pulp in your cluster? Or is it like one operator per installation?
The assumption I've been operating under is one operator per installation.
Okay, thank you.
So
go ahead, Dennis.
Oh no, I was going to say we can't hear you, but you weren't speaking yet.
So yeah, this is going way beyond than I expect for the demo goals. But yeah, getting back to it. So I did install the pulp resource. Let me try to show the steps that I did before. So I got here on the installed operator tabs, and I installed the pulp custom resource, and here's where we really start to creating our pulp containers. So you get to this view with some predefined files. So I put route and chose our URL here. I chose the S3 storage type because we need to set like read write many resource, and for the filing system it's more complicated to set it. So I've been using S3 for this demonstration as it is easier to set, and I set a secret and for S3 credentials, and I picked that here and just hit create. So let me show here how I create the secret. So you can see the secret that I created here. So it has all these values, S3, access key ID, and all these others. And I created here by going to create button from YAML, and I got an example from our repository when we have here on CI assets, Kubernetes, and AWX. So I copied here and modified some values and put it there, hit create, and done. So once I got the Pulp custom resource installed, it took care of everything like creating the Postgres container, the Redis container, the API content, and so on. And you can go to all these containers, see some metrics like memory usage, CPU usage. You can see the YAML from them. You can see the logs. And when you have like 2 containers for one pod, you can choose here. So the pulp operator keeps running a playbook on the reconcile loop to certify that everything is as expected. So if it notes some different, it will like act to change it. Like you can start like with 2 pulp workers, for example, and set replicas to 3. So when this playbook runs, it will see that it currently has 2 workers, but it wants 3, so it will act to get to the desired state. And here you can also go to terminal and go inside the container and do some.
What is this
Yeah.
name Pulp Manager? Where does that come from?
It comes from the template from the operator SDK. The manager is based on the Kube builder, and it is the operator node itself, as we say. So
yeah. Okay. So this is this is the operator, the controller pod that's running.
Yes. Yes.
Go.
So yeah, I don't know why it froze and I cannot type here, but trust me, you can you can like see things like @c/pulp/chat scenes here and interact with your container when everything goes well. So okay, let me show other things. So as it's installed, let me see networking routes. So the operator create this route first, and I can open this link. And let me put slash. Okay. /API status. You can see that everything is installed. And you can see all the following clans and all these Kubernetes objects like PVC, route, and other pods and deployments were created by the operator. So what I intended to show is like this like very easy experience, like just going around clicking buttons, and you can have your pulp set just like that. So there are, as I mentioned before, so the managers is created on top of Cube Builder, and you can see some structure like very similar to what we have on a project. When on config, you have these kind of folders. Let me show it on the operator itself. So here on config, we have all the specific Kubernetes configuration. So you can see the CRD, that what defines that pulp object. And we have some open API schema to define all the variables that you use as image version, Redis image, and so on. And when that first moment when you are asked about when it was being pulled the information to build pulp, it comes from here. And we have the manager when we have all these configs for the operator node itself. And here at the samples, we have some examples on some variables that we set for starting pulp. So you can see here, for example, if you want to start like a Galaxy installation, we have to set some specific image and set all these variables here. And let me show the documentation. So besides let me get to getting started. So besides the OpenShift, we have other options to install, and we have a basic install that you can run on your Kubernetes. You just need to run make deploy on the operator, and it will populate all the Kubernetes resources it needs. And then you can set your specific custom resource for your needs. And the other very easy way to install it is from Operator Hub. So you go to the operatorhub.io and looking for pulp. And you can go there, click install, and just following all these very simple steps, and you get it on your cluster. And I think the last thing that I want to talk is about the containers. So we have 3 types of containers. One is the pulp itself, when you install like API content and work. So it's very specific to pulp and the tags that we use is latest for the nightly builds on GitHub, and stable for the last released pulp core and plugins versions. And we use also the tag that is the same as the pulp core, like 3.16.0, and it gets all the compatible plugins with that. And we have the web image, that is an Nginx image that routes the content and the API to pulp. And the other kind of image is the operator itself that comes with all the roles, like the roles for setting the API, content, workers, and so on. So yeah, I think that's it that I had to present today. Sorry for all the issues with my internet and things like that.
Thank you for this demo.
Do you want me to give a here's the core value that to users blurb?
Yes, please.
So yeah, so one of the inherent things of Kubernetes, one of the features of Kubernetes that this offers, even if you weren't doing an operator, is things like, well, first of all, it's like Kubernetes knows how to achieve the desired state, and it basically achieves it. If you were to, if your applications randomly crash every once in 100 days, it would know to start more instances to bring number of instances of desired state. It would know that if the workers keep on crashing, it would just restart the workers. And then you could do other things too. You could say like, Kubernetes, monitor these workers to make sure they're actually doing their job, and if they're not responding to requests in this time, restart them. And then you can do other things for that specific desired state. Like I think if it's desired state is inflexible on certain criteria, I say. Like you can say, judge the amount of inbound traffic and the response times, and if it's too much traffic, if the response times are too long, create more instances of the workers and more instances of the content apps. It can understand it. If you write the correct criteria for checking whether you need more instances or fewer instances, it will scale them up and down, as opposed to like the fixed number of like instances, like 2 or 3, like we had in the demo. And then the other really cool benefits. Well, sorry, the reason why you need an operator as a higher layer above Kubernetes is that the operator understands other differences in state that need to be accomplished for all different scenarios. Like the operator will know that I need to put this application in backup mode every 24 hours, and I'm going to do all these steps to gracefully put that data, everything in read only, start the backup, verify the backup, and then restore the cluster to read write. That's this overall, the whole experience is supposed to be the user provides the settings, including for things like really those oddball use cases like backups, and then the entire you just sit back and watch. It replaces a human operator, like a computer operator, like a system administrator who would normally do these things by hand or with automation with shell scripts and stuff.
Fabricio, do you know if Operator Hub provides any sort of statistics about how many times an operator has been downloaded?
No, I don't know about that. Neither
Yeah, I
about
don't
the
see it on the
OpenShift.
page, and I wasn't sure if like the author has some kind of other view.
So I do want to point out that many of those features we talk about, like the auto scaling, have not been implemented yet, but Kubernetes provides an awesome framework for implementing them. Another common use case of operators is the upgrades, because that's, it's a well-written installer, or well-written operator, it will understand I need to go from version X to version Y. These are all the steps I have to take, all the checks I have to do along the way. Kubernetes already understands many of these checks anyway, because it uses those checks for things like scaling and knowing and restarting services and etc. So there's in one of the slides that Patricio showed, you showed like I think you showed it. There was or I was definitely Googling it. There's the operator maturity model, and you would see features like that listed. Like
I see some questions here. Let me share my screen again.
Oh, another cool benefit is like If users want to provide an external Postgres, they can provide external Postgres. But if not, we'll manage the Postgres as a within the Pulp operator will manage the Postgres container for you.
So yeah, I just wanted to show you all that, yeah, the terminal works. So you can debug it from here. But I see some questions here on the chat. So Melanie asked about the web UI. I think, yes, this, so let me read the question. So because this has a web UI wizard for installation, would this be easy start point for a new Pulp user when compared to Ansible installer? I think this is like easier to get done, so you can have like an installation very quickly like that and very easy, but there are a lot of concepts to understand. So in fact, you still need to understand Ansible when something like bad happens, like, oh, my operator is not working, what happened here. So when you see all these logs from the playbook and things like that, you need to grasp some Ansible. So it's very easy to get it running, but it is complex to maintain it once it's there and you have some issues.
Could we, like, thank you, Fabrizio, for that. I'm wondering, just from general community feedback about how difficult it is to get started, especially with the Ansible installer. And we have tried a lot during the year to improve the documentation, and yourself and Mike have been instrumental in helping progress that. But I was wondering, the people that are just, say, looking to install Pulp, they're coming from backgrounds that you're probably more familiar with than I am. So the technology behind it, to some extent, there might be pros and cons of taking one approach versus the other, depending on their own expertise. And I was wondering, would it be useful maybe to put together like a battle card of some kind with advantages of this and disadvantages versus the requirements between these two? Like, this, to me, this looks a lot more seamless than what I've seen of the other installation method. And I suppose from a community perspective, I'm quite, I will be quite excited to find an easier path through for people. So is there a chance that we could put together some card like that, or some kind of overview in a very simplistic way that people could maybe grasp their options?
So you want to have some kind of comparison of the different installation methods between the Ansible installer, this operator, and the single container?
Yeah, so the single container is the single container, and I suppose, in my opinion, it would be ideal to have a production-ready single container, and then
yes,
we could just stop this conversation, in terms of from a new user perspective. But I suppose what I'm trying to say, Dennis, is I'm coming to this with the assumption that someone who wants to use Pulp is coming from a background that is not just, say, how would you say, like queen cake baking or something. They actually know other things, and I would like I suppose a requirements chart, as in like a prerequisite in terms of what you would need to know to get going with this, what technologies this involves and the kind of concepts that are essential. And maybe we could provide a versus Ansible installer for this option. So if one might be easier than the other for a particular individual, and if we have this available, I think that we should get as many eyes on it as possible.
Yeah, I agree a lot with that. Like, my planned upcoming presentation on the installer will cover, here's what it's like to actually use the installer as a user. Here's the dependencies, like you have to install a suitable version of Ansible, and here's how you would install it. And here's what it's like to deploy, and like, oh, you made a boo-boo in your variables. It's not the end of the world, but you have to modify the variables and then rerun the installer, and it's safe to rerun it. But users just see a cryptic error, and and that's supposed to be a launching point for solutions like, do we want to improve the error messages, override the default error messages? Do we want to change the user experience? They're not going to run into those errors commonly,
Yep.
And but the dependencies is a big part of it, and the knowledge required is a big part of it too. Because like an Ansible user will be much more comfortable rerunning the installer than somebody who does not have Ansible knowledge.
Yeah, and I think similarly here, person who's familiar with Kubernetes is going to be much more comfortable with this, than somebody who has to learn like Kubernetes and Pulp.
Yep.
So I'm looking at our docs. And I'm sorry, did I interrupt you, Brian?
Well, I was going to share one thing, which is I used to use this project called FreeNAS. This is like decades ago, and before I did a lot of work like with my own Linux administration, and it would out of the box create for you a RAID big network file system, and you just put in the hardware and you just run this little installer and poof, it just works. And that was great right up until it broke. And then it was so easy to get going, but I had no knowledge or development along the way that when something didn't work perfectly, I was screwed. Now, I didn't keep anything important on there, but anyways, this is something that happened to me that I just wanted to share. I think it's somewhat related. Like, what do you do when things go wrong? That's just such an important question.
Yeah. Okay, there's a question in the Matrix chat asking to see if we can demonstrate how to add another worker pod with the operator. Is that possible right now to scale it?
Yeah, but let me just like continue on this topic. So I think like as this is like very easy to go through UI, I think it is good for people that wanted to try Pulp and see if it matches their needs. Like, oh, I wanted to build some API. Let me just run like some clicks here and there and see how Pulp is. So you get rid of the complexity of installation, and you can see, oh, this is how Python works, and you can see like, oh, now I know how it is, and I can decide if I will move forward to that or not. But yeah,
but you also have to have access to Kubernetes.
Yes.
Like there, and this is what I think Melanie is kind of getting at, is that there is like each option has its own set of requirements. And what I'm not seeing listed in our docs, when you go to docs.pulpproject.org under installation options, any information about all of this. And I think the docs there focus solely on the Ansible installer. And I feel like the landing page should probably give you those options.
So, Dennis, you said that the
We
question
want
was
to see
about
a demo of scaling of the Pulp workers.
Yeah, so currently we do it like manually. So I go here on installed operators, go on Pulp custom resource, and I click on the installed one, and I can change the YAML there. So so worker currently has 2 replicas. I can put, I don't know, 4. And save. And the reconcile loop will trigger and it starts to run. And soon we'll have like 2 more pods here. It takes a while because it runs the entire playbook and all the roles until it finds what is different from what it expects. So
yep,
it will probably be here in a couple minutes. But I see all the question here on the chat about, yeah, from Ina, is there some definition of backup and restore? Yes, we do have. It's almost the same thing from the pulp resource. You can go here and on the backup and create one. We have already some predefined files here. And here you just declare the name of the custom resource you have that you want to backup. And when we create it, will create some container and a new volume to backup all this data and use the backup role for saving for everything. And the restore is pretty similar, and you point to a backup instance and it will restore all the data back to the cluster. And I go back to pods and see if there's, yeah, now you can see more workers there, 1, 2, 3, 4.
When you create a backup, do you get somehow to define what you want to backup? I don't know, some directories, database, or this sort of details where they are defined?
No, the backup current, it just gets all the Kubernetes objects and the data that you have, like the SCAD data and the artifact data and things like that, and store it in a new volume.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to clarify, volume is basically like a file system, usually on top of a hard disk image, but Kubernetes abstracts what's the underlying thing for you. And it's a persistent volume, which means the file system exists indefinitely. It's not like Scratch or ephemeral. And I want to point out also, we've had, in addition to our two main installation methods of the operator and the Ansible installer, we've had two easy to use deploy, really quick to do deployment methods over the last few years. One is the single container, which puts all the services in one container, and the user has to like mount their file systems that they protect, or they back up into the container image. And the other one is I call it InstaDemo. It deploys a lightweight version of Kubernetes called K3S. Yes, it's a K3S, it's K3S. And then it deploys the Pulp operator on top of it. So it's basically you run one shell script on any standard Linux distribution and any remotely standard Linux distribution. And there's Pulp running as an application. Yes, there's a big Kubernetes layer underneath it, but it's still Pulp running as an application. And when you want to uninstall it, you can just uninstall K3S. Actually provides an uninstaller, which is nice. We decided to stop maintaining that because it's kind of we didn't want to support that use case once we had a single container, but it's still promising. It did not have a web UI, but for all I know, there could be something like K3S right now with a web UI. It did not require virtual machines or anything. It had bundled its own container runtime. So it's really not. It's not maintained right now, but it exists in Git, and it's really nice, actually. So easy to install, but you don't have the web UI to help you configure stuff, though.
Yeah, that's one of the things about using OCP. I'm just musing out loud here. There's the experienced software repository management person that wants to experiment with Pulp. There are people that understand Kubernetes and have been asked to experiment with Pulp. There are folk that are kind of clueless at both those levels. I got told I had to manage repositories and I don't understand Kubernetes, but OCP has this really nifty web UI and I can just push buttons until things work. And all of those are useful, actually, useful use cases Although the less you know about all the pieces, the more you get bitten by what we've talked about, which is as long as the main path goes fine, you're great. And then as soon as something goes wrong, the less you know about the pieces, the more helpless you end up being, because at the end of the day, repository management is complicated, Pulp is complicated, Kubernetes is complicated, OCP has a whole bunch of switches you have to push in exactly the right order if anything goes wrong. It would be interesting to see if we could come up with a page for each of these options that are, I know nothing. Okay, here's a cargo cult list of commands you can run. And at the end of that, Pulp is up and running. What do I do if things go wrong? Okay, for that, you have to learn more. But here it is, for each of these, if you do this, you will get Pulp running in a given environment. Now, so if I'm, for example, if I know a lot about OpenShift and Kubernetes, and I go to a page that says, here's a cargo cult thing for how to get it up in OCP, I can say, oh, I understand all of that. And there's this one thing that's new to me, and it'll come up and run, and I can concentrate on that one new thing. That might be a place to go over the course of the next 6 months to open up the list of people. Is pick the thing that you know about. Here's the instructions for how to get Pulp up and running in that environment without explaining anything extra. Just acknowledging this is cargo cult scripting, run this script and Pulp will come up. And if you run this script, then you'll see that it's up. And here's how you can interact with it. Might be useful for us to get over that initial hump, to the degree that made any sense to anybody outside of my own head.
Yeah, so here's the answer to your question about when we can do that and when we cannot do that. There's basically 3 types of variables for the installer and 2 types of variables for Pulp operator. The 3 types of variables for the installer are plugin versions. This does not exist in the operator because we provide the plugin versions for you. You can't pick them, you can't choose them, or which ones even. And then the second is make it compatible with your environment. This is the part where there's always tricky stuff. Like sometimes it's distro specific settings or how the distro is configured, and the Ansible installer has to account for those weird distro settings. Other times it's other stuff across their environment, like that we have to account for the overall IT environment. And this is where Kubernetes comes into. Like you want to use an external Postgres. Okay, just if you specify the settings wrong, you're going to get an error, and the error is going to be pretty much what Postgres client would say, or Ansible's version of what Postgres client would say. And then the third is like general preferences. And generally, the general preferences aren't going to mess you up. If you lower the number of workers per node, you're going to have performance issues. So really it's number 2 that's the tricky part, is how do you provide useful error messages when things fail to deploy because you told it to connect to your Postgres server in the wrong way, or you did talk to your Postgres server in the right way, but there's something in the middle interfering, like on your network. It's stuff that's where the real complexity lies. And we'll be brainstorming ideas for how to overcome that for the installer, but we can brainstorm ideas how to overcome that here for the Kubernetes operator. Like look at the terminal, see that when the Kubernetes operator tried to run this Ansible role to configure the and the Ansible role would call the post Pulp database config, like create the tables and stuff like that. Oh, that failed to create the tables. Oh, that failed to talk to the server in the first place. It's that debugging of the environment integration.
It's all complicated.
Oh.
Yeah, this is why I keep thinking I've kind of been obsessed over the past couple of years about making our installers and the onboarding experience easier, make it easier, almost obsessive about it. But the more and more I think about it, the more I think that maybe we need to try to create a place, maybe it's Discourse or something like that people can, go when they don't have problems. I mean, I'd love to have our things do more kind of automated, autonomic helpful responses, better error message, whether it's fancy or simple, doesn't really matter. Kind of like what you're talking about in the chat here, Jared. I mean, that I think is definitely a right way to go. But until we reach that amazing place, you know, maybe just better error messages and a place where people can go to create I don't like this term, community of practice. Several jobs ago, I used to try to help make communities of practice. That was like what we were employed to do. I'm pretty jaded on that term. But I mean, our support model right now is like, you're an end user. Oh, it doesn't go great? Open a bug, talk to us as developers, but maybe more of a peer-to-peer discussion area. And you do that by creating a place.
Yeah. And I just had one good idea for how to get users easily to try to get more users to successfully install Pulp is let's improve the single container and sell them on it aggressively, because the single container does not do all the integrations with the environment. It does not use an external Postgres. And then have instructions. Here's how you upgrade from the single container to the operator. Here's how you upgrade the single container to the installer.
Or
migrate from it.
Yeah. And the thing is, the single container can be hooked up to an external database. It can be hooked up to an external Redis. Like, it can be hooked up to S3 storage. So it's really flexible, actually.
Yeah.
And if you have your container hooked up to all those things externally, it doesn't matter. Like, it's really easy to migrate to something else.
Yeah. We still need the migration instructions, though, so they know how they can go from the local Postgres to the real Postgres cluster.
So we have a scheduled community discussion on the installation options, don't we? On Wednesday, I think, or do we?
I might need more time to prepare that simple answer, but looks like, but yeah, currently for Wednesday, I think, yeah.
Great. So perhaps just I'm aware of the time, but we obviously have a lot to unpack and discuss around these topics. So I think there is some time later to do that for sure. Fabricio, thank you very much for this. I'm going to stop the recording, and then in 7 minutes we'll be back with Mr. Douglas Furlong, I believe.
Let me just finish it real quick.
Sure.
So, yeah, I had like a thank you slide at the end, but I'm locked out of all my Red Hat account. So the only thing that I wanted to highlight is like what we currently talk on IRC matrix is Pulp, but it's like very inside. And we are talking with like the survivors, people that went through the installation and could make it. So we are losing like so many people out there. And I did this presentation to show that installation can be easier. I wanted to start out this discussion around how can we make it easier and getting more users. So I think I could accomplish it. I know that the installation is easier, but we still having lots of complex topics. But yeah, I hope in the future you will get everything easier. So thank you, everyone, and sorry for all the issues that I had on my presentation.
It's not your fault. Demo God must have blood. So.
Yeah.
Yes. Thanks for being the sacrifice.
Thank you.
Good. So we have 6 minutes. Were there some questions there that we didn't get to actually? Just now that I'm looking. Oh yeah, no, Brian is handling that. Okay, I'm just going to stop this.
And more than just theoretical, like we actually need to provide migration instructions and examples to be able to move between these different types of installations. So I appreciate you at least getting me thinking about the importance of that.
Oh, and I do want to point out the difficulty with using the Ansible roles for Docker Compose is that we basically do the database config. The Pulp database config includes like creating the tables and everything. And then we start to like install Pulp after that. Whereas when we do a single container or we do the Kubernetes operator with its container images for Pulp itself, it's like the database config and all that happens at runtime, like the first time we start that version of Pulp. It's like a shell script that's like an early script that gets run before Pulp gets run in actual containers. So that's one of the central design conflicts between the Ansible rules and using them with containers. We can't plug them into Docker Compose for that reason. No problem, Florian.
Myself and Florian have talked a good bit, and I think Florian gave me a lot of, he opened an issue on the website a few months ago, and it's kind of very much motivated me to update and get more, make some clarifications around the plugin part of that, about the support levels, about like what can be expected in each plugin. At the moment, I had something there, but it wasn't good enough, and all of Florian's points were very, very helpful feedback. And I believe Jared has been chatting a bit with him on an issue or so last week. So delighted to see you here, Florian.
I'm actually also rethinking my answer. There might be ways to adapt Pulp and Solar goals to use the Docker Compose. I'm gonna step out for a little bit.
Sure, we have 3 minutes before.
Yeah, I mean, take a break. Yeah.
Yeah, it's no problem. Mr. Furlong, would you like to test your slides again or get set up or anything? Excellent. Perfect. Okay, talk. I'm going to hit record, Douglas, and then it's over to you.
Morning and afternoon, everyone. So this presentation is just intended as a sort of like fairly high-level overview of how we're using Pulp 3 in our environment. I don't get into specifics per se. If we've got time at the end, I'm happy to answer questions. But for anyone that's looking to use Pulp 3, I thought it might be of some use. Here you go. As I said, so we're mainly using it for RPM content. We do have aspirations, but for now it is just RPM. This probably should have come before the last slide. So Linux admin, 20 plus years of experience, recently transitioned to Python development. The implementation of the Pulp 3 installation was interesting, to say the least. The lack of native RPMs was problematic for us. We ended up having to build them ourselves. We didn't particularly want to use a container solution. A large part of that is just the company that we work in, or I work in, has not massively adopted the cloud yet. So it's not the de facto standard. There's still a learning experience for us there, and it's a bit of a paradigm shift. So we decided to stick with what we knew. So why we wanted to use Pulp. Historically, it would have been the traditional repo sync to pull the content down, tens of dumb directories with elaborate hard links to optimize disk space, create repo and rsync to distribute those repositories around. And of course, it's RPMs only. And by RPM, I do just mean RPM. We wouldn't have had access to any of the Avata information or anything along those lines. The other option, of course, is third-party products, which were just painful to use from my personal experience. So we chose something that's more natural, a more natural fit, which was Pulp, the first iteration being Pulp 2. What we were looking to achieve was very much something that we could take and adapt to our own usage scenarios, something that we could program against. So by default, we only really go for things that have an API that allows us to modify it and fit in with our own tooling. As I said, something that was flexible. So there are other products out there. Some of them also use Pulp, but there's a certain expectation as to what, say, a promotional path would be for a package that needed to get out into the wild. Certainly in the past, that flow didn't work for us. We wanted the ability to be flexible. Again, can work with our existing tooling. By that, I mean the programming language. So for us, it was very much Python based. And then the usual things along the lines of efficient use of storage and it being extensible, providing authentication and authorization, and to facilitate the patching of our estate. So, as I mentioned earlier on in the introduction, our first attempt was very much with Pulp 2. So this is just to give a rough idea of that experience. I'll leave the first point to anyone that wants to read it. The biggest issue that we had with Pulp 2 was just the time it takes to publish the repositories. The fact that there was no versioning natively to fit in with our notional release cycle, we effectively had to duplicate our repos, which meant copying all of the content from one repo to another and then publishing it. That needed to be done at the time of creating the release. It couldn't be done beforehand. So our release process started off at 2 hours when we sort of like went into production with Pulp 2, but by the time we moved to Pulp 3, it had actually grown to 6 hours due to the number of repos that we had and the amount of content that was being created. I'm fairly certain that there was additional slowdown there due to the amount of data that we had, but I wasn't familiar enough with Mongo to even begin debugging that. And by that time, Pulp 2 was end of life, so it wasn't something that I thought it would be worthwhile wasting anyone's time on. It was a good learning experience. It let us solidify what a release for us looked like, and I can go into that in more detail later on if anyone's interested. But it was certainly a good learning experience for us. So from our perspective, when we went to Pulp 3, we got a bunch of stuff for free. The main bit was it was a blank canvas that allowed us to do whatever we wanted, including possibly hang ourselves at times. But it was flexible, which I very much appreciated. The introduction of the libraries, the client libraries, was a massive benefit from my perspective. I didn't have to mess around with requests and wrappers for requests in my own code and attempt, probably badly, to make it clean. Being able to just use the native libraries was really, really useful. And having the browser interface to be able to view what those offered was also exceptionally useful. I really, as a general rule, I really enjoyed working with it. There were a couple of issues, but on the whole, it was enjoyable. A big thing for us was the native versioning of the repositories. We had to cut some corners with Pulp 2 because of that. But with Pulp 3, it's just there. There are some additional things that we'd like, which has been discussed previously. So things like branching in the versions for notional merges into old releases. But aside from that, it's worked really well for us. And then some other things that we got with Pulp 2, so, efficient use of storage, the single tool chain for multiple content types, and Pulp 3, I believe, offers more plugins than Pulp 2 did. And it would be interesting to write our own if we ever get the time to do that. Everything you'd expect with management of RPM repositories we get for free. So the syncing and the publishing, the validation of the MD5 checksums or any checksum. And I have to say, an exceptionally supportive team. Not to be a suck-up, but it's been an absolute pleasure working with you guys and girls on IRC. It's been really, really enjoyable, and you've been exceptionally helpful. And I don't think that can go unsaid. So what did we have to do when we went to Pulp 3? More than I thought. So learning the new terminology, not a biggie, but if you're coming from Pulp 2, it's worthwhile getting your head around the changes in terminology. There's a couple of small things in there that if you can get your head around it, I think it makes a big difference to working with Pulp 3. Especially the fact that in Pulp 2, you would just have a repo and distributors and publications are all tied into it. With Pulp 3, they're completely separate objects that are managed and dealt with independently. Re-implementing the things that we got for free with Pulp Admin. So when I started on this journey, probably it's good that that was the case. There was no equivalent to Pulp Admin, so even the small things needed to be written ourselves against the API, and that's not a small amount of work. So that took up a lot of my initial interaction with it, and in fairness, probably slowed down the time to test things and get my head around things. Because often, certainly as a historic administrator, it's more interacting via CLI command interfaces that I would have learned the platform. And then everything else, which I shall cover. So I suppose this is the meat of the presentation, which is around the tooling that I had to write to work within our infrastructure. So obviously creating the different types of repositories, which would include things like the authentication methods, the type of mirrors, deleting, listing, and updating, especially the updating. So as which is more complex than you'd think. If you're in an enterprise environment, you can find that you're stuck on a repo that's no longer published upstream, and you don't want to be causing noise on a nightly sync run for repos that have disappeared. So you need ways of controlling things like that so that you can cleanly sync and get rid of error messages. Content, so adding your content, moving content between repositories. It's probably worthwhile. So on that one specifically, we've got a notion of an upstream repo, which we consider dirty. It's a verbatim copy of whatever's published by a third party. And then we've got a notion of a trunk repo. And that trunk repo is curated by us. We will copy data from upstream into trunk. They are explicitly, the link is explicitly broken. So we needed tooling to be able to move the content between those two. Similarly, deleting content, people accidentally upload an RPM, or it turns out there's a malicious RPM that has a rootkit from a particular third party. Being able to delete that content and the artifact associated with it, and of course finding content will often have users saying that they're looking for a particular RPM. How do you find that if you've got hundreds of repos and many versions of repos? And similarly, deleting, how do you know where you need to delete that content from? Monitoring of the tasks, being able to know whether a task is stuck. We've had issues with syncing where a sync will last many days and it just seems to be stuck because I'm assuming the remote end had an issue, though it could be us. Being able to track that down, being able to cancel it, being able to see specific details around the tasks that may be stuck or about a sync that may have failed, being able to see why that happened. Again, the lack of the CLI at the time of writing this meant that we had to do all of this ourselves. And then release management. So the big thing for us was being able to control what content gets into our production estate and how it gets there. So the bulk of the scripts that we wrote was specifically in and around this. The merging into a release was quite a big thing. So we would tend to run release A and release B, and they'd iterate through a week or 2 weeks, with the old release being replaced with the new release. Every so often we might have a package that we need to either add or remove to both releases, working out how to do that, working out how to work with the versions within the Pulp repositories, being able to see what was done. So during our release meeting, we would review what packages have made into specific repos that we particularly care about. There might be other repos that we don't care what gets into it. For example, let's say Fedora, we would just ingest all patches without any verification. We trust upstream. So we don't want to review that, but well, server, we definitely do want to know what's going into it. So writing the tooling to be able to do that, processing the errata, that was a fairly large piece of work for us. And global distribution. So we've got circa 6,000 hosts, not a huge number, but they're hosted around the globe. We want local access for those systems for build so that it doesn't take too long. And in the event of network connectivity issues or anything, we can run independently. So again, the tooling needed to work out how to do that, how to push and publish and make sure that everything's in sync. Pulp 3 problems. I'll be honest, we didn't really have significant issues. I think the biggest issue we had was the tasking system. And it was amazingly fortuitous that you guys had already fixed it before I hit it. So that was amusing, I would say. But that was probably the biggest issue that we had. Outside of that, we still have issues with authentication and authorization. Part of that is down to our implementation of using a different reverse proxy. But that's something that I'm going to have to spend a bit of time on to make sure that it is in place. From an ongoing issue, time to generate reports is a problem for us. I know that I've spoken to some of you in the past. So we get a report of everything that's in a release, and we store that offline for different reasons. At the moment, that takes probably 25 minutes to generate all of that data for all of the different repos that we have. And then finally, something that we've not got around to doing is removing bad content for good. At the moment, we're able to remove it from a release, which just generates a new version where that content isn't present. I don't believe we have any rootkits, but if we ever found a rootkit in our content, we would want that removed entirely from the environment. And that would be quite time consuming to do, I believe. Making sure that all versions that have the content in it, it's been removed, and once it finally has, purging the artifact. I think it would be nice if there was an easier way to locate that data in all of the different repositories and associated versions. What next for us? So as I mentioned before, we were looking for an organic solution that will grow with us. I believe we've got that. So I'm sure that quite a few things will come up. But first on those lists is adopting the file and container plugins. We've got immediate requirements for that. Writing our own LexD image plugin would probably be quite useful for us, or adapting the container plugin if applicable. We've not had any time to look at that yet. General tooling improvements, and something that's probably quite high on the list is housekeeping. So doing things like clearing down the tasks, entry table. We don't do anything along those lines. And I think that's it, just questions.
I mean, I have to ask, I'm guessing you use the Ansible installer. How?
Nope.
You said you installed it manually?
Yep.
Okay, because to be honest with you, our manual instructions have multiple omissions. Like we update the installer, but we don't update the manual instructions.
Yes.
Yes.
It was a bit of a journey. So the biggest issue was just the multitude of Python modules that are needed. I think by the time I finished doing the initial RPM builds, I got to about 115 different RPMs that needed to be built, which was painful. But the thing is, we very much want to own the infrastructure. And understand what packages are being updated, when they're being updated, and have complete control over that.
Right. Yeah, and I do want to point out, like in 2019, I started on creating RPM patches for Pulp and getting them into Fedora, but I shifted gears to working on the operator, which is seen as a much higher priority. And I mean, there's also big, but and then eventually the Foreman team started creating RPMs for their specific need and their specific set of plugins.
And if I was doing it now, I would certainly look at the Foreman RPMs to see if they were suitable for us. But when we started on this journey, which was the beginning of 2020, I think, there were no packages available.
Yes.
So we had no choice.
I see. Yeah, and just to clarify one thing, these are the state of both RPMs, if we actually were to deliver them, would be they would be usable by Pulp installer, meaning Pulp installer would do all the configuration rather than configuration being in scriptlets and stuff like that.
That's fine. Again, for us, we wouldn't be using the installer. We'd be using our own config management. I did use the installer as an initial kind of pointer as to what needs changing and what needs updating, things like the service files, or the unit files for systemd. But all of that, we would use our own configuration management for, which we do.
Great. Yep.
And obviously, the onus is on us to make sure that we keep a pace with changes in upstream. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, Grant, have you, Brian, have you questions?
Just a quick question. As you mentioned 6,000 hosts, can you give us a ballpark for how many repositories are important to you, and how many distributed versions of those repositories are part of your daily operations? Just to get a ballpark for the scale we're talking about.
Yeah, sure. So as part of our release, we have roughly, so on a normal day or cycle, we've got about 115, 120 repos that constitute a release. Of those, we only really care about maybe 10 of them, maybe 15 at most. During a rebase phase, that will double in size. And during a period when we're going, for example, at the moment, we're going from L7 to L8, there's a significant uptick. With regards to the number of active distributors that we have at the moment, I've lost count, but I think we're at around 50,000 to 60,000. That is not, those are not all needed. That would also fit into housekeeping. So we only really need probably, I think, anything more than 6 weeks of releases, I don't believe we need. And we only really care about the active 2. It would be a very bad day if we had to point to a release that was 3, 4, 5 weeks old. Any one release can have, I think the most we've seen is 25 merges to fix issues. So that would be 110, 115 repos or distributors times 25. And then you've got 2 weeks of that. So even though the current 50-odd thousand is a very, very high number, we would still see large numbers of distributors in play.
Thank you.
Is this because, so you need so many old ones around because you have machines that still rely on those?
No, because I've not written the code to clean it up.
Okay.
So our general approach to a release is so as I mentioned, we've got upstream. We only ever have one distributor per upstream repo. We then have our notional trunk repo. You could think of it a bit like a subversion. All of our changes go into trunk. And then we have a release meeting where we review all of the changes in trunk since the previous release. Your versioning makes it very easy to work that out, by the way. So we review all of those changes, packages that have been added, packages that have been removed, new repositories that have been presented, or repos that have been removed. We would, assuming everything's okay, we would then generate a new distributor that would point to the publisher that's for that trunk version. And then if we needed to make any changes in our estate, be it in the repository or our configuration management code base, we would then create a patched release. So it would be a 01, 02, 03, 04. And we keep all of those point releases around for the lifetime of the release.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Brian, I think.
Yeah. I have a bunch of questions, but I'll limit it to one so everybody can have a chance. You mentioned global distribution. So these are, how many points of presence are you do you have, if you don't mind sharing that? And then are those also running Pulp in them, or do you try to have one big system, and if they're separate, how do you sync them? And maybe you can just talk a little bit about global distribution.
Sure. So in Pulp 2, we had about 8 Pulp instances. In Pulp 3, we've shrunk that down to 5 instances for now. They are completely independent versions of Pulp, and the tooling that we wrote is responsible for making sure that they're in sync. So as a general rule, we do all of our work on the notional master or primary. Make sure that a release looks the way we expect it to look, and then on all of the secondaries we just sync the content. Similarly, when we're creating repos, we need to create the repository on the primary with its upstream data pointing to whatever upstream is, and then once that's done, we go off to the secondaries and we create the repositories there and make sure that the content's synced across. So all of that's done within our tooling, but they're all standalone Pulp instances.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, talk Ina. You have a question?
Yeah, a quick one. On one of your slides, you mentioned that you have future plans to use other plugins. However, you have some predefined requirements. Can you expand a little bit on what kind of requirements you have in place? Maybe the ones we still don't have, worked out in place already.
So from a requirements, it's not so much requirements of the plugin. It's just the plugins as they are now. We know we want to use them. So some of the content that we distribute would be, for example, VMware Horizon. Those packages are ugly binary blobs. Instead of putting those into our revision control system or trying to do an RPM wrapper around it and deal with the VMware installer, we would just put that in a file repository, being able to distribute ISOs internally. There's a whole slew of reasons why we'd want to use that. And the other one is just the container plugin. We're currently working with and around Docker and Podman, so we're looking to utilize the container plugin and have that fit in with our generic release process. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Ina. So, Matthias, I believe you have a question also.
Yeah, when you say release, do you merge all packages that constitute a release into a single repository to publish? Or do you have tooling to publish multiple repositories at the same time and distributors, or and distributors for them?
So I think I understood the question. We keep all of the repositories separate in their own, let's say, swim lanes. And a release would be, if we've got 100 repos that are notionally trunk, we would have 100 distributors created at the point of release, pointing to the publisher for trunk at that point in time.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Mike, I believe you have your hand up.
So could you describe your deployment or configuration method, like are you using Puppet or Chef or something like that, or using shell scripts?
Salt.
Salt.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Any more questions for Douglas? I had a bit of a side chat with Robin, and she's okay if there are other questions or discussion points that you want to bring up now. We have a bit of time.
Go for it, Brian.
All right. I have two questions that are very much kind of related. How many users interact with Pulp's API? Is it that you worked with, you mentioned like going to meetings and reviewing packages. Is this like, how many users are interacting with it?
Yeah. Not as many as we'd like. And a large part of that is down to the authentication authorization element. At the moment, it's just our core, by and large, our core systems administration team. So users would be responsible for maybe creating spec files that they want for RPMs being built. We would build it and upload it. So you're only really, from an admin perspective, you're only really looking at maybe 10 or 12 users that are doing it. We would like that to be extended out quite substantially, but obviously can't do that until the authentication and authorization elements are in place. I did look at that previously, but doing it natively within Django for Kerberos and IPA did not strike me as straightforward at all. And looking at the examples, I think you're predominantly using the reverse proxy as the authentication and passing that on to Pulp to do the authorization. Unfortunately, our reverse proxy doesn't support that, so we need to retool internally away from HA proxy.
Cool. That sounds great. I want to ask about authentication. When we do bring kind of eventually, hopefully soon, build out the authorization and the role-based access control for all the API endpoints. Did you have an external authentication system that you would want it to connect to? And
IDM.
I hear you.
IPA, IDM.
IPA, IDM. Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess my last question for now, at least, is if we had a user interface, would that be at all valuable to your goal of having more users having more users use the system directly, or is it strict API access? That's what worked well for you all, and that's what you're going to continue using.
Depends what the GUI offered, because we're fairly heavily customized and we've got a reasonably comprehensive set of scripts to work with it. I don't think we would want to manage changes outside of that script, but maybe a GUI that provides visibility as to what packages are available and where, what repos are available, versions, if a user's looking for a particular file, how that would fit in with, say, the container plugins, etc. There might be something there, and possibly for admins, our tooling is rough around the edges in certain places. So being able to look at the tasks that are open and navigate those tasks and the resources and created resources, that would be quite useful, I think. I certainly still find myself dropping into an IPython session frequently. If there's an issue with any of the tasks, I have to jump on IPython to interrogate the system a bit more. I think there is a GUI, a notional GUI for it, but it is but ugly with our RPMs. I think the CSS is a little bit broken for us, and I'm not entirely certain why. I think there's a ticket open about that one.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any last questions, Les?
I actually do have one more. Sorry. Can you give some anecdotal, maybe an impression of the performance between Pulp 2 and Pulp 3? I mean, you mentioned like 6 hours was like the kind of runtime.
I did mean to do that when I said it and forgot it by the end of the slides. So as I said, our release was notoriously bad at the 6 hour mark. It is now, if we remove the reports element, it takes about 45 seconds. When you add the reports in, it goes from 45 seconds to about 20-25 minutes. And obviously the biggest change there is the fact that the publications are happening at the time of content being uploaded and has nothing to do with the release process whatsoever. So that's just the time it takes to raise the API calls and to come back and stuff like that. It's night and day.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the reporting is slow is because you're querying the content API, right? And you have to paginate through all those results.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I have limited the content that I'm looking for to the bare minimum that each content type's able to return. But even then, it's very, very slow, relatively speaking.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're just doing lookups, so I can definitely see how this is very slow.
I do owe Grant some numbers around that. He did ask me for some about 6 weeks, 2 months ago, and I've just not had a chance to do it.
Yeah, it seems to me like we need some new APIs for this kind of data reporting.
Yeah, and for reference, the main reason why we're doing that is if things go really badly and we just lose our Pulp instances, or the databases are corrupted or anything along those lines, we've got minimal information along the lines of Nevra and errata IDs that we're able to reconstruct the repositories. And yeah, just having that offline, we feel is valuable.
Do you run those queries in parallel?
Yes.
That's an interesting problem. We should, yeah.
Yeah, I'm telling you, like we've talked about this on chat before, and
Yeah.
Yep.
I feel like we should look into this, improving the experience around this.
There's a couple of layers of ways to attack this, and Douglas, don't feel bad for not having gotten those numbers to me, because if you had, I would have forgotten you'd given them to me, because there's been so much going on. So, but there's a lot to do here, and hearing your real world experience reinforces how important it is in a way that's separate from the day-to-day existence as a developer of Pulp, because I don't have 50,000 distributors that I have to deal with, and so it only takes a second. Yes, but the zeros add up, and that's where it's really important to hear this. So thank you. This has been great. I'm just speaking for myself. This has been outstanding.
Welcome.
I have one more question. This is so great. I'm sorry. So we had a lot of discussion from various users of Pulp about what is the right way to handle this like malware example. Or say you have you discover a rootkit in a particular package. One of the ways that we've discussed is like, it's this search and destroy thing where, make it easy for users to report all the versions where something is contained, and then make it easy for them to delete all of those things. The other option is more like what people tend to say is a yank, where you don't delete the repository versions containing that, which you would have to do in order to actually delete it from Pulp. But you just kind of you corrupt or remove the binary data in a way that perhaps Pulp could indicate this package was yanked. This is like what PyPy does, and I believe Ruby Gems as well. Do you have an opinion or a perspective on which of these approaches would be the best fit for you?
No. I think both would work. I would want to know for certain that bad content could not be distributed in any way, shape, or form. I mean, another example, just this hasn't happened, but I could easily see it happening. Someone accidentally packages a file or an RPM with passwords in it. And you want those, I mean, you should just change the passwords, but that's not always easy. Or it could be external certificates that's not easy to remove. So having the ability to remove that data and know that it's gone for good is useful. As to whether that is, as you say, just poisoning the artifact, so the version is consistent, but you get bad data back, this package has been removed, whatever you want to call it, but pointing back to the same artifact, I don't have a personal preference one way or the other. It does sound like if you're able to identify the artifact, then attacking the artifact directly and leaving the versions alone is probably a cleaner solution. It just depends on where you really care about something being immutable.
Yep, and in the event that, like for example, it did go the other way, I suspect actually over time both of these will end up being made. But in the case like where we only had the search and destroy, going to delete all your repository versions in order to get this malware out of your system, and actually deleting the content, the RPM package itself as well. Like Pulp's like, oh, I don't have that never anymore. I mean, that could delete potentially a lot of your version history. Is that acceptable? Is that a significant concern?
For me, no. I think where it would cause us significant consternation is when we've got both a and B release that's going concurrently, and we've got to work out how to delete it from both of those and maintain the versioning history. That I could, just thinking about the code that I put in, that could be a bit of an effort to be able to do that, and just walking everything forward. But for other people, that maybe we're quite lucky. We don't have boxes pegged on really old releases, but I could imagine other organizations will have that, and that could cause issues.
Cool. Thank you so much. And do you have a test, like a pre-production, like do you have like a staging system for Pulp where you test upgrades prior to upgrading your production systems?
Not an ideal one. So we've got one that will just give us functional changes. So we've got a test suite that we wrote that basically goes through the tooling and make sure that when we create release, the expected content is copied across, that our reports look the way we expect them to look. But we don't have anything that would pick up on performance issues or anything along those lines. So yeah, we do have a test platform, but it's very much in a local dev context.
Cool, that's great. And you can apply a Pulp update there before you roll it out to all your bridge servers.
Yes, yeah, and we can create it, destroy it. Other people can spin up their own local testing environments. It's all based in and around LXD images, so it's very easy to spin up and collapse. And
Perfect.
Prior to that, our RPM build infrastructure will spin up a mini Pulp instance within the RPM build context and make sure that things start as expected.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Any final questions for Douglas?
This has been great, Douglas. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
it's not
thank you very
entirely
much.
selfless. I think it's quite useful for you guys to know how I use it.
Excellent. So thanks a million. I am just going to stop the recording. Okay, guys. Robin, would you like to postpone? So because of we had a cancelled session that was Douglas filled in for today, we technically have a gap tomorrow. So would you be willing to? So there, you can either go at 8 a.m. your time or 8:30 your time, or we can go ahead now for 10 minutes if you wanted it. I think I think it would be better to start tomorrow if I'm honest.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, either time works for me. I think I was going to chat with Mike about what he wants to do with his session. So either works. I'm flexible. 8 or 8:30 is fine.
Okay, doke. I'll put you down. I think it makes sense for you to talk before I do, Robin. So I'll put you down. I'll put you down for 8, if that's okay. And if you do, Mike, if you do decide what you're doing, will you let me know? There is time, I'm pretty sure, on Friday especially. But just let me know and I'll slot it in. So I think that is everything for today. Is there tomorrow? I will be talking first thing about what you call it after Robin. Like I'll be talking about the community channels. You know, the IRC, the Matrix, Discourse, this kind of thing. I didn't actually propose this, and I was trying to find a back channel to who did propose it, to understand is there any particular thing that they want addressed. If there is and you want to tell me, that would be great. If not, I'll just do my own thing.
I think that works. I just wanted to have like one place where there was like a summary of everything. So, and also just as an update, I was cleaning out the desk and I found an entire package of Pulp stickers that's still wrapped, so it's in pristine condition in case we need to like, you know, auction it off somewhere or something. I don't know.
Nice.
Those are old. I may grab
use
one.
some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They may not actually have adhesive anymore, right? Because this is like multiple years old, right? It's at least, you know, 4 years old, so maybe more.
But they're huge, right? They're huge in size. Like they're taking, yeah, a quarter of your laptop.
You don't need any other stickers anyway. Okay, doke, guys. I think that's everything for as far as I can tell. Has anyone got any final items? Or
Just one thing, Melanie, about the second tomorrow, and I believe I put it on the list, but you didn't ask me. What I had in mind was that we moved a lot of tools around, for example, trying to move or at least bridge from IRC to Matrix, move discussions to discourse and stuff. And this all happened last year, right? So I think it's time to talk about how well or not well this turned out.
okay.
And maybe make a final call that discourse is now the place or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. Thanks for the context. Ina?
I have an organizational question with regards to the upcoming PulpCon release. And I was wondering what to do about the go, no go meeting, because it's quite difficult to squeeze it in with our program. Is there any suggestion on how to proceed?
I think we need two pieces of information. This is not a proposal on how to proceed. I think we need maybe an update of Matthias when you think your POC for Pulp Container would be done. I have no expectations on when that is, but I do think that's something we'll need to know. And we'll need the same question answered from David Neuswanger for the Galaxy stuff. I've been talking with David Neuswanger about an expectation for them to deliver it on the 10th and 11th. And I can check in with him to see if he also thinks that's realistic, and if not, what his counterproposal is. I suspect we will be moving it back, and I think we just need to see how far.
Yep.
All right, so I'm canceling the meeting.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
we'll follow up on IRC with Matthias, David Neuswanger, and other people involved in the. Okay, thank you.
I will try to work on the container side this week as much as possible.
Yep.
Despite having a lot of talks here. And next week too. And the week after, I'm probably out of office. So this may be something to consider when pushing.
Cool. I'll talk to David Neuswanger today.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, doke. I don't see anything else, so I think it's time to release you to the rest of your. And yeah, I think that's it. All right, lads. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Bye.
See you. Thanks.
See you
Everybody
guys.
online.
See you.